You are listening to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our sponsor, MSP-Ignite. MSP-Ignite offers a peer group experience that is unique to managed service providers in the technology industry. If you are serious about implementing a model for success through sharing and collaboration of best practices, this is the best way to do it. Head on over to msp-ignite.com to get more information. All right, on to the show. Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of MSP 1337, where today we're going to talk about change controls, which is a fun topic. And with me today, I have Craig Lojewski of C2 Computer Services. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks for having me.
So, Craig, we've had this conversation probably a dozen times over the last 6 months or so. And actually many of the security advisory members for MSP-Ignite, we've been talking about change control as we've been going through CIS Top 20. And everybody has a different opinion on the importance of change control. And rather than get caught up in the politics of change control and why we should or shouldn't do it, I thought it would be a great opportunity to have you share with our audience why, because of something a client asked of you, it has become sort of a primary part of what you do with your clients.
Sure. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we had a client that implemented what they call the change control process, or a CCP. And they asked us to follow that process anytime we had to make a change to the infrastructure or any part of the environment in the network. So we started with a basic document that just said, what is the change? What's the reason for the change? What's the date of the change? Who's going to be involved? How are you going to test it? If it doesn't go well, how are you going to back out of it? And so we started to use that for that client. And after a couple of months, I said, this is a really good thing that we should be doing with all of our customers. So we basically took that document and we made it into our own. And now we're using it across the board for all of our customers.
So with this plan or document, if you will, which I guess is a plan, it seems like you just described a lot of things that we should all be taking into consideration and perhaps take for granted when we think about our engineers that are doing these things for us. What was the sort of initial response or gut feeling that, say, before you even talked about it internally with other clients, what did that look like for you? Did it just kind of hit you between the eyes and you're like, this is going to be a challenge?
It was really something that opened my eyes, that why hadn't we thought about this before? And because it's so simple, but it's so significant, because it captures moments in time where you have a baseline of a system, and now you're going to make a change to that baseline. So it captures a moment in time of what was the system like before you made this change, and what it's going to look like going forward. And then so in a week or a month down the road, if something goes wrong, you can reflect back on these change control documents that you've created and had approved to say, oh yeah, on this day we did a certain thing, which goes far beyond what you would normally do with just a ticket, in a ticketing system.
So if I think about change control, the way you're describing it with regards to a sort of having a plan, is this really any different, or maybe the words aren't the right way to approach it, but is this should this be part of like a business continuity plan? Is it its own, does it stand alone and is a part of that? Or is that something that should be getting captured in most organizations' business continuity plan?
I never really thought about it as part of a business continuity plan, but really it is, in a way. I mean, you're really capturing information that can help you go back in time and capture the changes that had been made. But one of the things that we have as part of the CCP is, if we are going to make a change to our business continuity plan, if we're going to make a change to the backup system for a particular client, we do a change control document for that, so that all the stakeholders are involved. my engineers are involved, the people on my team, everybody's aware that this change is going to be made and what specifically that impact of that change is going to be.
So with regards to a change control, so you have so sort of recap, you've got a client that has helped you has driven you down this path of embracing a change control plan. You have adopted that not just for them, but you have taken that and modified it for your benefit for elsewhere with other clients. So what does it look like when you think change control for whatever it is that you're going to change? Do you do that for everything? Because I would think that this gets very complicated if every time you have to make a change to a client environment, you're having to execute on your change control plan.
So we draw the line that if it's anything that's touching the infrastructure is when a change control document has to be created. So if we're just adding a workstation or making changes to a laptop, those do not require a change control. But if we're going to update firmware on a server, if we're going to update firmware on a firewall or change a firewall rule or a policy, those I would consider infrastructure tasks. And so those require a change control for us. So things, again, things like changing firewall rules, maybe changing a policy in Active Directory, not necessarily adding a new user in Active Directory, but if you're changing a password policy within Active Directory or changing some other significant GPO, you need to do a change control for that.
Okay, so if I'm doing change control for those things, it makes me think about automation. So if I'm doing, critical security patches on critical infrastructure, and I have it set up as automation in my RMM, what does that look like as it factors into a change control plan?
So we don't capture things that are automated like that. It could be something to consider, but all the things that we're capturing in our change control plans right now are manual incidents that we are planning and forecasting for, and discussing with stakeholders and getting approvals and time maintenance windows. So a normal patching of a server that happens on a regular basis, that's not going to be part of a change control document, at least not at this point for us.
I guess if you were to add it to your change control plan, I can envision that there's two things you could do. One would be, we know what Patch Tuesday looks like, right? So roughly the third week of every month, Microsoft, for the most part, unless it's a sudden urgent patch, you kind of have a predicted window when something like that would happen. So you could say, hey, this is a regularly scheduled maintenance window, which probably should be documented as part of a change control. The other way of doing it that I think might make sense, not to tell you what to do, I brought you on because I believe that what you're doing is what lots of MSPs should be doing, but are sort of hesitant because of all of the additional work they believe it's going to add. Automation is actually quite beautiful. If you have the automation create the ticket and close the ticket, that would be part of a change control process, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So there's really no extra work involved to have the change control plan get executed to make sure that when I, as the engineer, have to go back and look, what happened yesterday, I can at least go in and look at a change control ticket that's dated yesterday and see maybe hypothetically it's already documented in there, and at least gives me a place to start.
That's a really good point.
I think that's where we have problems. The more I've talked to you about change control, the more I'm like, why was I so resistant to doing it? And I think there's probably one reason that comes to mind. That requires me actually taking the time to document the impact on the organization by doing something, right? So if I make a change, what really would happen if I fail at this?
Correct. Yeah, and when we create a change control document, we tie it to a ticket, and then it's basically stored in SharePoint, the change control document, and then that link goes into the ticket, so we can always refer back to it again. And we make sure that the customer is aware that this change is going to be made and that we get buy-in from them on what time, what day that's going to happen. And even though, unlike the client that we started this with, they're very involved in approving the process. The rest of our clients, we're just basically telling them, we've got to do this to your firewall. We've got to do this to your server. Can we do it on Saturday? and then we create the document and, just say that they've been told about it and they approve of it.
So to some degree, what you're describing is a CYA for some clients and a change control process for others that have basically the same process is involved, but doesn't necessarily require lots of involvement from the client.
Exactly. And I think too, one of the things that it's done for us is it's elevated my techs and my engineers level of responsibility and accountability, because they know when they're doing these change control documents that there's a lot of eyes on it. It's not just, hey, on Saturday I'm going to do A, B, and C. It's all laid out and spelled out and approved. So I think it just brings a higher level of accountability to everybody on the team.
Yeah, I remember a time not so long ago when I was running my MSP where we decided on a happy hour Thursday, we called it Thirsty Thursday, that we thought maybe it'd be a good idea to do a VMware ESX upgrade on all of our remote VMware hosts. And we did really well on all of the hosts except for one that failed because we had not done a change control. I will tell you, it wasn't because it was Thirsty Thursday. We had not put a change control in place where we would have identified that the hardware didn't support the VMware version. It didn't include the drivers for the hardware. So when that server rebooted, it found no drives in the array because no drivers were loaded on reboot. So had a change control been in place of any kind, we would have totally caught that one. So again, to your point, infrastructure is key. So that leads me to another question, because obviously nobody wants to do more work. Since you've implemented this, have you seen a reduction in overall rollback or things causing you to have to do more work as a result of having the change control in place, or has it actually done the opposite by reducing the workload?
So it's just a tad bit more work up front, but on the back end, it really does help us out with a much less amount of time that we have to go back and resolve something because we didn't think it through all the way. It does happen occasionally, but it's not very much at all. So I think it's definitely worth a few minutes up front to save a few hours on the backside, and embarrassment and reputation damage that could cause.
Yeah, the avoid the egg in the face kind of model.
Right.
So along those lines, just kind of wanting to continue to reiterate or validate the reasons for doing this and to help MSPs recognize that we're not trying to create more work for them. And in fact, the opposite. How often would you say on any given client do you find yourselves having to execute a change control with them?
So probably, I would say in the past 30 days, we've probably done maybe 15 change controls, and we're talking about a fairly small number of clients. So probably one per customer per month.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a whole lot lower than I was expecting. I for whatever reason, I just assumed that it would, multiple times a week might be the case, but I think that's reasonable to say one per client per month. Seems.
So we've done, recently, we went through all of our clients and we updated iDRACs. We have pretty much Dell servers everywhere. So there was an iDRAC patch that had to be applied to all the customers. So we did a change control for every customer and if some customers had multiple servers, it was just one change control for all their servers. And so that was the most recent one that we did. The customer that initiated this whole process for us, we probably, not counting them in that one per month, we probably do 10 or 15 per month for them.
Okay, so
they want everything down in a change control.
And to some degree, if you're following the COBIT, the ITIL model, there is some validity to that, right? Or some of the frameworks, like I know, I think it's SOX actually has some stuff in there that says if you're adding a user or removing a user, that should be part of a change control, particularly when you're adding a user with elevated permissions, that is part of a change control. So that kind of circling back, roughly one change control ticket per month. So I want to make a clarification here, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong. You can roll multiple infrastructure changes into one change control item, correct? Is that fair?
Yeah, I would do it if it's the same change being made on multiple devices. So if you have 5 firewalls and you're going to be updating firmware on all 5 firewalls, that could be one change control.
So that the task itself, it merits the change control, not the quantity or device. The quantity of times or the devices do not merit additional change controls.
Right.
It's the task itself of what is being addressed.
Yeah, and that's how I would do it too. Because I'm thinking we did not too long ago, we did an upgrade on switches, firewalls, and Ruckus wireless integration for a controller and all the access points. We put all of that into one change control, and we just itemized it in the description. The customer knew that on that weekend we were going to be updating these various components to their environment, and it was all done under one change control, and then that transferred into one ticket.
So that raises a question that maybe takes us off on a tangent here, but that sounds like a project.
Yeah. But is that, I mean, how would you think about that differently from a change control standpoint?
That's a good point. So
break it down further?
Maybe this isn't about the change control necessarily being changed. It made me think that a change control is applicable across the board here, right? We're saying that anytime that you impact infrastructure, you need to have a change control in place. So if tomorrow you called me up and said, hey, Chris, we need to implement a transition from our current 2016 server to a 2018 server or 2019 server, I just made up a server number there, to a 2019 server, that's not just a change control, right? That's also a project. And you might even go so far as to say, hey, to whatever your client's name is, you would start feasibly with this is going to be a project or an additional cost to client, right? And in that project, you're also writing out a change control.
Yes.
So I think for me, that's a big takeaway to say change controls should be a part of every conversation. And we talk about, if we're looking at CIS top 20, the first 6 controls, we really don't spend a ton of time talking about change control, but it is referenced. Do you care to elaborate? Because I know you've gone through sort of the first 5 controls, the first 5 policies as part of our initiatives with MSP-Ignite on where you see challenges in incorporating change control for MSPs. I mean, you've already done it. As they're going through these, do you have any suggestions or recommendation as they look to implement a change control plan?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Our document is just a 1-pager. It's actually 2 pages, but the second page just lists what the severities are, low, medium, or high, depending on what the reason is for the change or what type of change it is. It's more of just a chart on the second page. The first page just basically says, what is the change going to be? When are you going to do it? Is it a low, medium, or high priority? Is it an emergency change or just a regular change that can be done? Emergency change is something that has to be done within 24 hours. And then what's the change? Who's involved? What are you going to do to test it? What's the end result going to be? So it's just a series of questions, and it all fits on 1 page on a Word doc. Probably takes, after it's all thought out about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, the actual filling out of the change control probably takes 5 minutes.
So as we get closer to sort of wrapping this up and maybe recap a little bit, you talked about it being an emergency situation. Do you ever create a change control after the change has been made?
Yes.
And talk me through or walk me through why that would be the case.
So in fact, today we had a situation where a service account on a customer's Active Directory, the password changed and that service broke on the server. So we had to go in and we found out that when this account was created, it was created as a user account. We didn't know that it was going to be a service account. So we had to quickly go in, change the password to something that we knew and get the service running again, and then go back and re-identify that account as a service account and not a regular user account. So the change had been made already and the systems got back online and everything started working again. And then I backfilled the change control after the fact.
So you described infrastructure as the primary for change control, but what you just described to me wasn't necessarily an infrastructure change. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So Active Directory, and not adding a user or taking away a user, but
Got it.
changes to a Active Directory policy, a service account, a privileged user. You had mentioned that earlier in the conversation.
Sure.
Those types of things are going to require change control.
Got it. So uh, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the not so much the post change control, because I can think of a lot of things that could happen where a firewall just stops working. And you put in a reactive change control after the fact to say, firewall was replaced, or power, things that are more like you were reactive. But by not having the change control, someone down the road troubleshooting a firewall problem and is like, why does the serial number not match the asset? And it's like, well, let's see if there's a change control. Oh, wait, we had to replace the firewall. Someone forgot to update the documentation. Makes perfect sense. But in this context, how do you help people? Like, this was probably started out as a ticket, right? That says something's not working.
Yes, that's right.
And so we're describing something that says, I'm fixing this. You would think that, is it not enough to just have the ticket that says XYZ happened? This is the resolution to that ticket. Or does it take the ticket and say this becomes a change control as a result of what was done?
So we're not as automated as that. That would be pretty cool to have that, have the ticketing system know if it's a change control.
Well, I'm saying,
Ticket, but
so you took the ticket and said, I'm
yeah.
converting this from a traditional ticket to say this is actually a change control ticket.
So it's kind of, I think part of this is like, we don't have it all documented. Like, here's everything that needs a change control. It's pretty much what's in my mind. And as situations come up, we just know that if it's within the infrastructure, if it's within that space, that a change control is going to need to be made. So
And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? I mean, I think you're highlighting what's really important here is, if we know that it is an impact on infrastructure, a change control should be in place. If we get outside of that, now we're just splitting hairs over what is and isn't needing to be a change control. And over time, as you get better at it, you'll make better decisions on whether or not you should have had it be a change control, or you made it a
right,
change control and it didn't really need to be. You've also highlighted that you don't focus really on this when it comes to endpoints or end user changes, because that's not infrastructure specific. It's a manual process. It's definitely not automated. Although, as we said before, there's some areas where if you could do an automation ticket, you'd at least have the documentation that this was a change control automation ticket, like a server update, those kind of things.
right.
Before we close out, how much time did you guys spend building this one-page document?
Probably, I mean, it's evolved over time, but it hasn't changed that much. It originally came from this initial customer that we had that wanted it, and then we've just made it our own. So, it's really, like I said, it's just, maybe a dozen questions, and you just answer those questions. And, I think any MSP that wanted to do this could easily create their own change control document by just thinking out what is a change control. There's a lot of stuff online. I'm happy to share the one that I have within our MSP group. And,
And I know we have shared that with a few people that have asked for it. So I appreciate you saying that. So if you're listening to this show and you're a member of MSP-Ignite, please reach out in Teams, either to myself or to Craig, and we'd be more than happy to make sure that you have a starting point, as templates do make our lives easier. The last thing on the list I had is, Craig, you've been working on the CIS Top 20, and you're currently getting ready probably to work through Control 5, as we have that coming up on our town hall tomorrow. Has there been anything, as you've gone through these controls, obviously change control being part of that, that you just felt like, man, this was just, why did I go here?
I don't think so. I think all of these top six, we're on number 5 now. they're just so fundamental. And I feel privileged to have been a part of this group so far because I've learned a lot and I've been able to implement most of this into my own business, as well as deploying it out to our customers with the inventory and the admin privileges, and implementing some new tools and processes. So there's nothing that really stands out that I would say anything negative about. I think it's all very positive and all very doable for anybody that's serious about it.
And Craig, for those that are listening, how big is your MSP, if you don't mind me asking? And I don't mean dollar wise, just like what's your sort of resource capacity?
So we have seven and a half people. We're getting ready to hire another full-time engineer. So we have 6 people on the tech side, including myself, because I'm still unfortunately heavily involved in
Sure.
support.
The
But
average MSP has that
yeah,
problem, right?
so yeah, we're a fairly small shop, and with lots of plans to grow.
And where can people find you?
C2CSI.com.
All right. Well, there you have it. We've talked about change control until there's not much more to beat up when it comes to change controls. For those of you that have listened to any of the other episodes, you know that we're heavily engaged in CIS Top 20. We're often very involved in MSP-Ignite. You can find us on LinkedIn under MSP 1337. Love to have questions. If there's topics that you would like to suggest, we're always open to new topics, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. And this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Until the next episode. This has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks for joining us.